Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions, a comment or two, if I could. Mr. Parental, I appreciate you have given a very passionate defense of the decisions of the courts. And I have to say that if you believe the courts are infallible with some of their decisions or applications of the law regarding ESA, or really regarding any area of the law, that you may be the only person in this room who would take that position. In fact, I'm really quite surprised in a bit of your comment when you said it was insulting to question some of these decisions. And being a professor of the law, I'm surprised that you would take such a position. And I'm suggesting that that's probably not a position you would teach your students, nor is it a position that you would take if it was an area of law which you disagreed with the court's decision. Dr. Noss, you mentioned, and I appreciated the fact that you talked about President Nixon being one who initiated this process, and also that the vast majority of Americans agree with this. And I think that's worth reinforcing, and Mr. Chairman, you made this point as well. The vast majority of Americans want to see this successful, including the vast majority of Republicans, including all of the members of this committee. We want to see species protected. Certainly we don't want to see species extinction. And we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. The only question is, again, as the Chairman indicated, what is the best way, and in some cases the most efficient way, that we can do that? And in that regard, I'd like to then focus my comments and my questions regarding some of the unintended consequences that may result from excessive litigation, or how these petitions to lead, particularly these petitions to list, can lead to excessive litigation. Let me quote a statistic and then ask a question from that. Between 1994 and 2006, there were an average of 20 petitions to list that the Fish and Wildlife Service received. Dr. Noss, I'll start with you. Do you have any idea how many they've received in the last few years or the last 4 years?
I know it's a lot.
It is a lot.
Believe me, I am no friend of litigation in a general sense. I am no fan of courtroom science, where talking heads come in, hired guns, and give one side of the story without being objective. It bothers me. But I've been one of those, but I try to be as honest as possible.
And I appreciate that, and I get that sense from your testimony that that's kind of your attitude towards that. Mr. Parental, do you have any idea how many petitions the Fish and Wildlife has received over the last 4 years compared with 20 before?
Well, I don't have the specific number. I know they've increased, and the reason that they've increased is because Congress has put a moratorium on listing. The Bush administration stopped listing. There's a backlog of listing that has occurred over the last 2 decades. That's the reason.
But that wasn't my question nor my comment. Do you have any idea how much they've increased?
I don't know the exact number.
They've gone from about 20.
I know it's increased, and I know the reason that it's increased.
They've gone from about 20 to more than 1,200.
And the reason is because of the backlog of listing, because the program hasn't been funded, because the agencies haven't done what the law requires, sir.
I haven't asked you a question, and that's not the area of my questioning or my interest right now. My point is that they've gone up by an extraordinary amount. Now, I'd like to quote you.
You should ask why.
I know why. And I think we have a disagreement on opinions as to.
All right.
Now, let me ask you, would you agree with the current administration's position? This is from the Deputy Secretary Hayes when he says, my major concern is the fact that this has been fish in the barrel litigation for folks who, because there is a deadline and we miss these deadlines, and so we've been spending a huge amount of time, in my mind, relatively unproductive time. And once again, this isn't a Republican administration. This is the current administration saying relatively unproductive time fending off lawsuits in this arena. Mr. Noss, again, I'd like to come back to you and ask you to respond to that, if you would.
Well, the reason the agencies are getting sued is that they're not following the law. And the main reason they're not following the law is they don't have the budget to do it. There's also political interference. I've witnessed some of that myself. As Congressman DeFazio may be aware, the biological knowledge to list the northern spotted owl as endangered or threatened existed many, many years before the listing actually took place. And people were scared to death about what might happen if that bird were listed. In the end, of course, it wasn't the Endangered Species Act that caused a court injunction against logging in the Northwest. It was a violation of the National Environmental Policy Act and National Forest Management Act.
I would suggest that you may be right on that. In some cases, they are sued because they may not be following the law, but I would also suggest, and this is very obvious to anyone who is honest about this, it's very clear that in many cases they're suing because it's a revenue source for them. You know, in the last 4 years, 570 lawsuits the Justice Department has had to defend that have led to an outcome of more than $15 million allocated to different environmental groups. And it would be, I just think, dishonest to not recognize that that's a very clear financial.
If that's happening, I deplore it, believe me.
Yeah, thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired.